the science of perfect potting soil. Your container plants may not be dying because you forgot to water them. They may be dying because of the soil beneath them. And the strange part is that the same potting mix can sometimes behave as if it is too wet and too dry at the same time. Water may sit near the bottom of the container while the upper layers dry quickly. Roots may look surrounded by moisture, yet still struggle because they cannot get enough oxygen. Fertilizer may be present, but damaged roots may be unable to use it efficiently. To understand why some container gardens thrive while others slowly decline, we have to look beneath the leaves and enter a world most gardeners rarely see. The tiny spaces surrounding a plant's roots. The hidden world inside a pot. When we look at a container filled with potting mix, it appears solid. But healthy growing media are full of spaces. Some spaces hold water. Others hold air. Roots need access to both. Water carries dissolved nutrients through the plant and supports nearly every biological process involved in growth. But roots also respire. Their living cells need oxygen to release energy. This is why a container filled with dense, saturated material can become dangerous. When water occupies too much of the pore space for too long, oxygen becomes limited. Roots become stressed. Their ability to absorb water and nutrients declines. Under persistently wet conditions, root diseases may become more likely. The gardener sees a wilting plant and thinks it needs more water. More water is added. The problem becomes worse. This is one of the great contradictions of container gardening. A plant can wilt while sitting in wet soil. The leaves tell you the plant is struggling. They do not always tell you why. Drainage is not just a hole in the pot. Most gardeners know that containers need drainage holes. That is essential. But good drainage is not only about allowing excess water to escape from the bottom. The structure of the growing medium matters just as much. Fine, compacted particles hold water differently from larger, more porous materials. A good potting mix creates a balance. It should hold enough moisture to keep roots supplied between waterings, while still allowing air to return after excess water drains away. This is why ordinary garden soil is often a poor choice for containers. In the ground, soil is part of a huge connected system. Water can move outward and downward. Roots can travel through a much larger volume. Put that same soil inside a pot, and the physics change. The container creates boundaries. Heavy garden soil can compact, drain slowly, and become difficult to manage. This does not mean natural soil is bad. It means that a container is a different growing environment. A pot is not simply a tiny piece of a field. It is its own ecosystem. Why potting mix feels so different? Commercial potting mixes often contain materials that seem unusual if you are accustomed to gardening directly in the ground. Peat moss or coco coir may form part of the base. Perlite may appear as small white particles. Compost or other organic materials may provide nutrients and biological activity. Sometimes bark or similar coarse materials are included to improve structure. Each ingredient has a job. Peat moss can hold substantial moisture while remaining relatively lightweight, although its environmental impact and sourcing are reasons. Some gardeners look for alternatives. Coco coir, made from coconut husk material, is another common component. It can retain moisture while contributing useful physical structure. Perlite is not fertilizer. Those lightweight white pieces are expanded volcanic material. Their value is largely physical. They help create pore spaces, reducing compaction and improving aeration and drainage. Compost plays a different role. Good mature compost can contribute nutrients, organic matter, and microbial life. But more compost is not automatically better. A container filled entirely with dense compost may hold too much moisture or behave unpredictably depending on the material. Again, the secret is balance. There is no magical ingredient. There is a relationship between ingredients. The water-holding paradox. Imagine two containers sitting beside each other on a hot rooftop. The first contains a very coarse, fast-draining mix. Water passes through quickly. The roots receive plenty of oxygen, but the container dries so fast that the plant becomes thirsty by afternoon. The second contains a dense, moisture-retentive mix. It stays wet for days. The gardener waters less frequently, but the roots spend too much time in low oxygen conditions. Neither extreme is ideal. The perfect mix depends partly on the plant, the container, and the environment. A thirsty tomato growing in full summer sun may benefit from more moisture retention than a drought-tolerant herb. A small terracotta pot may dry much faster than a large plastic container. A windy rooftop can remove moisture far more rapidly than a protected patio. A gardener in a hot, dry climate may need a different balance from someone gardening through a cool, humid season. This is why copying a potting mix recipe without understanding its purpose can sometimes fail. The ingredients matter, but the conditions matter too. The most common mistake, perhaps the most common mistake in container gardening, is watering according to a calendar instead of the plant and the soil. Every morning, water, or every 3 days, water. It sounds organized, but plants do not experience identical conditions. Every day, a cloudy day may use much less water than a hot, windy one. A small seedling may consume far less than a mature fruiting plant. As roots fill a container, water use can change dramatically. So instead of asking, "Is today watering day?" ask, "Does this container need water?" Check the growing medium. Feel its moisture below the surface. Notice the weight of the pot if it is small enough to lift. Watch how quickly water drains. Observe the leaves, but do not rely on them alone. Over time, the container teaches you its rhythm, and that rhythm changes with the weather and the plant. When soil becomes old, potting mix does not remain physically identical forever. Organic components decompose. Fine particles accumulate. Repeated watering can change the structure. Roots fill available space. Salts from fertilizers and irrigation water can build up. A container that drained beautifully at the beginning of the season may behave differently months later. This is why experienced container gardeners pay attention not only to feeding plants, but also to maintaining the root environment. Sometimes a plant needs fertilizer. Sometimes it needs a larger container. Sometimes the old growing medium has become compacted. And sometimes accumulated salts need to be managed with appropriate watering and drainage. The visible plant is only half of the garden. The other half is underground. A simple mix for vegetable containers. So what should a practical container gardener actually use? There is no single universal recipe, but a useful starting principle is simple. Build the mix around 3 functions: moisture retention, aeration and drainage, and organic matter and nutrition. A straightforward home mixture might use roughly equal portions of a moisture-retentive base such as Coco coir, mature compost, and an aeration material such as perlite. That is a starting point, not a law. If the mix stays wet too long, increase the coarse aeration component. If it dries extremely quickly in your climate, increase moisture-retentive material. For plants that require especially sharp drainage, the mix may need to be adjusted further. For hungry fruiting vegetables, nutrition will also need to be managed during the growing season because a pot contains a limited reservoir of nutrients. The important idea is not memorizing 3 numbers. It is understanding what each component does. Once you understand the functions, you can adjust the recipe instead of blindly following it. The fertilizer trap. A struggling container plant often receives fertilizer before anyone checks the roots. That can be a mistake. If the root zone is unhealthy because it is constantly saturated, severely compacted, or damaged, adding more fertilizer does not repair the physical environment. In some cases, excessive fertilizer can increase salt concentration and create additional stress. Nutrition matters, but fertilizer cannot compensate for suffocating roots. Before feeding a weak plant, look at the entire system. Does the container have adequate drainage? Is the mix remaining wet for an unusually long time? Has the plant become root-bound? Is the pot too small for the mature plant? Is the growing medium compacted? Only after understanding the root environment does fertilizer become part of a sensible solution. Roots need room. Container size is another part of soil management that is easy to underestimate. A tiny herb may thrive in a small pot. A mature tomato, cucumber, pepper, or other vigorous vegetable demands much more root volume. Larger containers generally hold more water and nutrients and experience slower fluctuations than very small pots. But larger does not mean indestructible. A large container filled with dense material can remain saturated for too long. The container and the mix must work together. Think of the pot as the architecture and the potting mix as the environment inside it. Both shape the life of the roots. How to know when the mix is working? Healthy potting soil does not need to look perfect. It needs to perform. After watering, excess water should be able to leave the container. The mix should become evenly moist without turning into heavy mud. After drainage, air should gradually return to the pore spaces. The surface may begin drying while deeper layers remain slightly moist. Roots should be able to expand through the material rather than fighting a dense block. And most importantly, the plant should respond. New growth should appear normally. Leaves should maintain appropriate color for the species. The plant should recover predictably after watering rather than remaining chronically wilted. Healthy roots are often pale, cream, or light-colored, depending on the species, rather than black, mushy, and foul-smelling. These observations are more valuable than any label printed on a bag. The recipe is not the secret. It is tempting to believe that successful gardeners possess a secret soil recipe. 3 scoops of this, 2 scoops of that, 1 mysterious ingredient. But the real secret is less exciting and far more useful. They understand what roots need. Water, but not permanent saturation. Air, but not a mix that dries instantly. Nutrients, but not excessive salts. Space, but not a container so poorly matched to the plant that moisture becomes impossible to manage. Structure that lasts long enough to support the growing season. Once you understand those principles, potting mix stops being a recipe. It becomes a tool you can adjust. A rooftop gardener facing intense sun can make the mix more moisture retentive. A gardener in a rainy, humid environment can increase aeration and protect containers from constant saturation. A gardener growing Mediterranean herbs can create a faster draining environment. A gardener growing thirsty vegetables can prioritize steady moisture without sacrificing oxygen. Different plants, different climates, the same underlying biology. The garden beneath the garden. Above the soil, gardening is easy to admire. Flowers open, leaves reach toward sunlight. Tomatoes turn red. Vines climb. Herbs release their fragrance when touched. But beneath all of that beauty is another garden that we rarely see. Thousands of roots exploring darkness. Water moving through microscopic spaces. Oxygen entering after drainage. Organic matter slowly breaking down. Mineral nutrients dissolving and moving toward living cells. The success of the visible garden often begins there. So the next time a container plant begins to struggle, resist the urge to immediately add more water or fertilizer. Look downward. Touch the mix. Check the drainage. Think about air. Think about moisture. Think about how much space the roots have. Because the perfect potting soil is not the richest soil. It is not the darkest soil. And it is not the soil with the longest list of ingredients. It is the growing environment that gives roots what they need in the right balance for long enough that the plant above them can do what plants have always known how to do: grow.